Read the tranquilizers. Sedator! Sedator!
Things have been going pretty well for Yuri. Kind of. In a span of weeks, most of South America, Eastern Europe, as well as Africa and the Middle East are now under the Epsilon Army's control. The PF remnants in Australia was similarly blindsided by Yuri's sudden uprising, with several key positions already overrun using mind control. And while many Soviet and Allied regiments continue to put up resistance around the world, the initial blow Yuri struck was still of monumental success. Elsewhere in East Asia, plans to invade key KI facilities in Japan are now in discussion. Nothing major, as it is still too early for Epsilon to even consider contending with the Chinese Navy, though that too may soon change. For now, the PRC has largely refrained from intervening in this global conflict, just as Yuri hoped they would. Aside from a few skirmishes, the Chinese army has seemingly done its best to avoid any large-scale conflict with the Epsilon army, presumably thanks to the full nuclear deterrence now in Yuri's possession. The wedge he drove between China and the rest of the Comintern had bore its fruit. And now, more than 2 years after the failure that was the Chicago incident, the great leader can finally restart the construction of his global psychic network. That's not to say his enemy's struggles have all been in vain, however. The escape of the Soviet general concerns him deeply, as their tactical ingenuity proves to be a real thorn by his side. And although his forces have surrounded the British Isles, he knows Epsilon is still no match for the Allies on the sea. Work towards a resolution is progressing steadily in that regard, but it's yet too early to shift their focus entirely onto the Allies. Having reorganized their command structure, a portion of the Soviet forces are finally beginning to adapt their tactics. Anti-stealth measures quickly found their way into each and every one of the Soviet bases, dramatically reducing the effectiveness of the shadow tank divisions. Beyond that, the Reds have also begun devoting more time and resources into eliminating Epsilon's adepts, and casualties quickly rose among the psychics. This was of little worry to Yuri, however, for even the dead have their place in Epsilon's ranks. A new research facility set up in Bran, Romania, had just put on the finishing touches on the Mastermind, a type of artificial brain constructed by splicing the neural tissues of fallen adepts into one gigantic cortex, which is then mounted onto a tank chassis. This horrific machine is able to mind control several humans at once, perfectly suited for supplanting the dwindling adept numbers, possibly even replacing the psychic beacon as Epsilon's premier mass mind control device. Its potential was experienced firsthand by a Soviet task force when they foolishly tried to stop the project. By sabotaging a psychic beacon that was mind-controlling a local Soviet base, the task force managed to seize the research facility, destroying all but one mastermind stationed there. Yet, it was with this singular mastermind that the proselyte was able to recapture the facility, securing the blueprints within for mass production. Found also within the facility are a batch of completed blow ticks, which were used by the proselyte to demolish the Stalin's fists deployed in the area. Paired with a line of protective brutes, the masterminds then launched an unstoppable counterattack, laying waste to the helpless Soviet base. An incredible first showing for his new mind control apparatus, and a clear sign to Yuri that his ploys against the Allies can now safely begin in earnest. With the Soviets near completely driven out of Western Europe, time has come to provoke the Allies into action. If he cannot assail the British Isles by sea, then Yuri shall do so another way. Having the world at one's fingertips can open up a lot of new options. But first, he must deal with the Allied commander, the one problem the Soviets never found an answer to. With Spain and parts of France now under Epsilon control, an opening has presented itself in Roma, Italy, where Epsilon will be placing their bait for the Allies. Although the Russians there, cut off from the rest of Western Europe, continue to resist in the country, their minds will soon succumb as well. For Yuri has consecrated the city as the construction site of a new psychic amplifier. If allowed to go online, its mind control waves would eventually be able to reach the London fortress, and Yuri would have defeated the Allies without even setting foot on the British Isles. That is, of course, the ideal scenario, but once the news reaches the Allies, they're sure to retaliate using their chrono technology. And with the bothersome Allied commander at the helm, even Yuri has his doubts. But that doesn't really matter, as failure would be just as much of a success in this long con. A task force under the command of 2 Epsilon officers was deployed into the area, weaving their way through the Russians patrolling the city with ease. They soon reached St. Peter's Basilica and snatched it away from Russian control. An amplifier was promptly constructed, and despite the Russians' best efforts, was successfully activated under the protection of the new masterminds. Within days, the amplifier would subdue all of Italy, then the rest of Western Europe, and before long, the London fortress itself. With such a threat now presented to them, the Allies no longer had the luxury of choice, and will soon be forced to go on the offensive, thus drawing the Allied commander out to play. When that time comes, the Epsilon army shall be prepared for their arrival. The trap is set, the bait placed. Now they wait for the bite.
Incoming transmission.
Master Yuri, we seem to have run into some troubles in the US.
There is no rest for the wicked, and the Soviets are keen to see that through for Yuri. Thanks to the leadership of Krukov and Reznov, the Soviet states of America hasn't yet fallen completely into Yuri's hands. The country is now locked in a three-way battle between the US rebels, Soviet Russia, and the Epsilon army. Such difficulties were not part of Yuri's plans, and it has led to the unplanned discovery of the psychic amplifier by his enemies before he asserted total control over the region. Yes, the Epsilon army has reconstructed the psychic amplifier in Chicago as well. Previously believed to have been reduced to a complete wasteland by the Midas warhead, the Windy City isn't actually rendered uninhabitable, contrary to the reports that were now concluded to have been falsified by Yuri. Instead, it has become home to a device that threatens what little control the Soviets still held over the SSA. The desperate struggles of the US rebels and Soviet occupiers allowed them to catch wind of this deception, and both forces began moving in to try to take the device for themselves. While the rebels were able to get there first and have already engaged in combat with Epsilon forces, the influx of Confederation soldiers following the Soviet general still managed to secure a foothold in this three-way battle. Afraid that the newcomers would beat them to the punch, the American rebels began attacking the Soviets as well. Using this to their advantage, the Soviet general deployed several new Dracul prison vehicles, using their powerful tranquilizers to abduct many Allied infantry, whose equipment are then given to Soviet soldiers instead. Knowing that the amplifier is the true goal of this mission, the general tried their best to ignore or otherwise stall the Americans harassing their base, and focused their attacks on the Epsilon forces. Legions of brutes stood between the Soviets and the amplifier, but they were no match against the catastrophe tanks aided by these new Dust Devils, a mass-produced version of the Sandstorm smoke bomber. The general's forces quickly reached the main Epsilon base, and with the help of a tactical nuke, quickly prevailed over their enemies, seizing the amplifier for themselves. Luckily, this particular amplifier's construction was already complete, and a skilled engineer was able to rewire its signals against the Epsilon army, and summarily activated it.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Twice now has Yuri lost the amplifier in Chicago, and the ramifications of this one just as severe as the last. Rather than a decisive victory for Yuri in North America, the captured amplifier has now turned the Soviets into the aggressors. The Epsilon survivors in the vicinity fell quickly to the amplifier, joined by the nearby Americans soon after. Faced with the combined might of the rebels and the Reds, any plans to immediately retake the amplifier ended in failure as well. Having been forcefully shifted into a defensive posture, the Epsilon frontline suffered a catastrophic blow in the SSA, with most abandoning their post and flocking to the nearest psychic beacons for shelter. Disastrous as it may be though, there is still a silver lining for Yuri in all of this. Without any beacons to boost its output, the amplifier will take substantially longer to expand its influence, giving Epsilon more time to prepare countermeasures against it. While not nearly as powerful, the psychic beacon signals can still be used to project a counter field against the amplifier's own signals, which will hopefully rein the situation back under control. A setback like this will drastically delay the completion of the global psychic network, but at least the situation isn't beyond salvage. For the time being, attention should still be focused on the Allies. And with any luck, they should be arriving just about now. It didn't take long before the trap had sprung, and the Allied commander has surfaced in defense of the London fortress. Having thoroughly analyzed the global anomalies in the past weeks, the Allied intelligence department has finally deduced the cause of the Soviet activity. Yuri, the former Russian chief advisor, has staged a global uprising against the Union with his own forces, who call themselves the Epsilon Army. This new threat is anything but a trivial one, as they had already taken Moscow and killed Romanov in the process. With their chain of command shattered, the Soviet dominion practically disintegrated overnight, and the Chinese, seemingly fearful of the Midas bombs, are reluctant to engage Yuri's forces as well. Which is strange indeed, for the Allies are certain that the critical blow they dealt to the Midas production line would have prevented the creation of any more bombs. And only one more, one of the two they failed to eliminate in Gelendzhik, exists at most. Perhaps this fact too was made unknown to the Chinese, an integral part of the illusion upheld by Yuri to guarantee the Soviet supremacy in the last 2 years. All of this presents a problem though. Without any entity strong enough to rival the Epsilon army, Yuri has set his sights on the Allies, which have put their plans for the Paradox project in grave danger. With 2 psychic beacons boosting its signal output, the amplifier's influence would reach the Isles much sooner than the Allies were comfortable with, and they had to deal with it as soon as possible. Thankfully, they have just obtained the means to do so. With the Chronosphere rebuilt and its errors fully ironed out, as well as the return of Special Agent Tanya, precision strikes that were previously impossible feats are now a thing of reality. A nearby Italian base under the influence of one of the psychic beacons was spotted by the Allies, and they teleported a small insertion team right on top of the beacon, immediately capturing it for themselves and freeing the Allied garrison under its control. Having thoroughly studied the info obtained from the New York psychic beacon in the last war, Siegfried and co have not only deduced the means to maintain the psychic beacon, but also discovered the possibility to repurpose its signal as a shield against other mind control waves. So long as the beacon stands, the Allied forces nearby needed not fear the amplifier's influence. Counterattacks by the Epsilon army followed soon after, but the Allies came well prepared to combat their mind-controlling foes. A project long overdue, these new robot tanks, heavily redesigned and retrofitted with a rotating Jupiter laser turret, proved to be a real threat against Epsilon's psychic divisions. With additional chrono reinforcements, as well as a fully functioning facility ready to pump out more equipment, the Allied commander quickly fortified their base and began planning an attack route towards the amplifier. The most direct path is blocked by a Russian garrison under the control of another beacon, and the commander planned to capture said beacon as well to get the Soviets on their side. Before they could do so, however, the beacon was destroyed by a sudden missile strike, fired by the skilled crews of a naval vessel that had snuck in nearby. Freed from its grasp, the Russian forces began fighting both the Allies and the Epsilon in their confusion. Without a psychic beacon of their own to protect them, however, they soon fell back under the influence of the amplifier. Yet this brief struggle had provided the Allied commander just enough breathing room to focus down the outlying Epsilon defenses, with much of their success attributed to the Black Widow. Although still a crude replica of the original US prototype, this new stealth jet carries a powerful jamming apparatus, which significantly disrupts the accuracy of enemy equipment in its area of effectiveness. Combined with the fearsome Thor gunships, the Allied commander was able to brute force their way through many entrenched enemy positions. Epsilon's formidable masterminds were also exploited by the Charon tanks, their cumbersome frames erased from existence before they could even retaliate. The Allied troops soon surrounded St. Peter's Square and summarily destroyed the amplifier. Although the thought of capturing the device did cross their minds, the Allies realistically did not have sufficient manpower to spare on defending this structure, and would rather not risk it falling back into Yuri's hands. Their only goal right now is to buy more time for the completion of the Paradox project. That does not mean, however, that this would be the end of their exploits. Far from it. Like it or not, Yuri's move had stirred up the hornet's nest, and he will have to deal with the consequences. With a solid foothold outside of the Isles, free from Soviet and Epsilon influence, the Allies can now assist the remnant resistance in Western Europe without being bottlenecked by the chronosphere's recharge time. Most fortunate for them, as there are two additional points of interest in Europe, both of equal importance, that require their attention. The first is in the city of Caen, France, specifically this laboratory, which was developing a type of advanced energy conductors for the Paradox project's main weapons system. Unfortunately, the city had recently fallen under Epsilon control, and the plans for said conductors along with it. Before Yuri had resurfaced, the city was under fierce lockdown thanks to the Trident battleships stationed within the city, which kept it safe from the Soviets even after the retreat to Great Britain. Hence why the Allies felt safe conducting such a critical piece of research here, and had even sent 2 KI scientists over to help finish the conductors quicker. Yuri and his mind control tricks, however, easily bypassed the city's defenses, leaving the Allies to deal with this mess. If left unattended, it won't take long before Yuri learns the full details regarding the Paradox project from the 2 scientists. The second is a research facility in Dundelandsdalen, Norway, one of the very few that weren't destroyed but instead captured by the Soviets during the Third Great War. The technicians there were working on a highly experimental fighter jet, codenamed Barracuda, which will be equipped with advanced stealth technology that bypasses any and all radars known currently, allowing them to conduct precision airstrikes on key enemy installations while being practically unseen. Of course, this research, along with the equipment required to complete it, had now fallen into the hands of Yuri. If completed and enhanced with Epsilon's own diabolical illusion technology, it would spell certain doom for the Gladius system defending the English Channel, easily outmaneuvering the Aegis cruisers and Thors defending it. The opposite, however, is also true, as the Allies could use a powerful bomber themselves to perform swift strikes on Yuri's psychic installations. Knowing that the Allies could interfere with the extraction of this tech, however, the Epsilon forces are already preparing to relocate the components and equipment through their underground tunnels, leaving little time for hesitation. Since the safety of the London fortress is on the line, the Allied commander is placed in charge of the operation to retake the plans for the Barracuda project. A significant-sized strike force was dropped near the facility, and swiftly recaptured one of the outposts. With a proper staging point for their attacks ready, the Allied commander successfully intercepted the first few convoys carrying the stolen components. Their enemies soon reacted by taking longer detours behind fortified outposts, making it difficult for the commander's ground forces to catch up to them. Worse, this region is also laced with blowtick tunnels, allowing the explosive creatures to impede the Allies at every turn. An answer had to be found, and the Allied commanders sent for their first completed batch of hummingbirds, the fastest jets ever conceived by the Allied forces, capable of creating time warps which drastically slowed down the units affected. With their help, the Allied commander managed to significantly stall the remaining convoys, buying just enough time for their forces to reach the trucks, successfully recovering each and every piece of the valuable technology. On the other side, Special Agent Tanya and a group of Allied soldiers were sent to Cannes, liberating a friendly outpost under the influence of a psychic beacon. With their help, the team pushed further into the city, destroying yet another beacon which controlled the scientists and their guards. It seems 2 years of imprisonment had barely diminished her skills in combat, as Tanya easily handled most of the heavy lifting once again, single-handedly destroying all of the Trident battleships hijacked by the Epsilon army, before escorting the KI scientists to the Allied Tech Center and the Epsilon Pandora hub as well. An MCV was then chrono-shifted into the Allied outpost, giving the commander responsible for this operation the necessary resources they needed to finish off the remaining Epsilon forces. Thankfully, the acquired intel from the labs indicated that nothing about the Paradox project besides the idea of energy conductors had been leaked to Yuri. The far more interesting discovery, though, is that Yuri is constructing yet another psychic amplifier, this time in Borid, Morocco. While this amplifier isn't nearly close enough to capture the London fortress on its own, its activation will still allow the Epsilon forces to form a larger encroachment around the Isles, putting its coastal defenders in danger, perhaps even jeopardizing the Gladius system in the process. Deciding to strike while the iron is hot, the Allies sent forth a team to tackle the amplifier before its construction can be finished. An abandoned American outpost is located not too far from the amplifier's deployment zone, which is currently being occupied by the forces of Scorpion Cell, and the American soldiers that previously operated this outpost is instead being held nearby by a psychic beacon. Preliminary scans from the Allies indicate that one of their MCVs is still present in the base, most likely being prepared for reverse engineering by the Scorpion Cell's leader. Recapturing it will allow them to re-establish a foothold in the region, which is exactly what the Allied commander did. A small team managed to make their way to the area via a series of underground tunnels, and retook the precious MCV. Additional forces soon arrived out of the tunnels, and helped the Allied commander repel the initial counterattack from the Scorpion Cell. A large amount of enemies still blocked the path between them and the amplifier, however, so the Allied commander decided to first destroy the psychic beacon controlling the nearby American garrison in order to obtain their assistance. A volley of missiles from several storm children was able to accomplish this task, and the commanders sent their men to rendezvous with the now freed garrison. But it was not warm embraces that welcomed the commander's forces, however, but rather a hail of bullets. Heavy retaliation ensued from the supposedly freed troops, who have collectively entered a frenzied charge towards their base. This unexpected development caught the Allied commander off guard, and it would have cost them a significant amount of resources had it not been for the cryo spears stalling the enemy's advance. It wasn't until after the engagement had finished did the intel officers conclude that this was most likely a fake-out created by the Epsilon forces, and that the troops controlled by the beacon were actually just Scorpion Cell forces in disguise. Frustrated by the setback, the Allied commander decided to look for answers elsewhere on the battlefield, where a remote research facility is said to be located. This particular facility was of American origin, and had been delving into the potential of a mobile uplink device with the Mercury network prior to its fall in the hands of the Cell. Since they still haven't fully regained control of the Mercury satellite network, the Allied commander decided it's worth a shot to investigate this facility, and their finds proved to be invaluable. Prototype schematics and all related data on a mobile Mercury controller, codenamed Athena. Its onboard communication device is not only capable of strengthening their connection with the Mercury satellite network as a whole, but also allowing input of more precise coordinates in the midst of battle. This experimental tech, coupled with the Americans' recent success at recreating their Mercury uplink, has not only made it possible to construct new satellite nodes wherever they so choose, but also enabling high-volume orbital strikes with little to no delay. No longer will the Americans need to look back at the days of yore for a glimpse of their prized creation, as the Mercury strikes are finally back in their arsenal once again. With their control over the network fully restored, and these newfound long-range artilleries at their disposal, the Allied commander effortlessly decimated the Scorpion Cell base and destroyed the psychic amplifier. And despite the appearance of a counter-attacking shadow tank division, the Americans were able to hold their ground against these elusive foes. With a fully operational base restored in North Africa, the Americans may soon be able to regain their control over the region. The prospects are looking better and better for the Allied nations.
Incoming transmission. Commander, the amplifier, the beacons, they were all a bait. Yuri provoked us to send you on a mission away from the London fortress, so he could strike us from within. The European Council has scheduled an emergency meeting, starting right now.
The amplifiers, the beacons, they were all a bait. A provocation to lure the Allies' finest from their nest. The one and true target is, and has always been, the London fortress. While the Allied commander was busy fighting in Morocco, the Epsilon Navy, who were seemingly content with serving as a mere deterrent to Great Britain up to this point, has suddenly decided to engage the Allies in the English Channel. Distracted by this sudden change in attitude, most of the Allied forces rushed to defend the coast, inadvertently leaving their formidable fortress vulnerable for an attack from within. An attack from a chronosphere. During the pandemonium of the Black Forest defense, the Allies had little time to get their men to safety and only managed to preserve part of Einstein's legacy. They believed the Midas bomb had destroyed everything they left behind, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Yet another prize from the proselytes' work in Japan. The existence of a secret facility below the Black Forest complex was made known to Yuri. Chief among the technologies kept in the substructures was the original chronosphere, dating back to the Second Great War. Yuri had always intended to take this device for himself, so before he had revealed the Midas bomb to the Soviets, he made preparations for the warheads to be modified, dampening the payload's destructive power enough that, while it wouldn't spare the lab itself, would ensure the survival of the underground facility. The Gen 1 chronosphere, as well as some of its related research, remained unscathed as planned, and the Soviets have been keeping possession of it ever since, storing the device in their research facility near Bodensee, Germany. That changed several days ago, when a task force led by Ron and Mulver had arrived on the scene. Guided by the proselyte, the duo cleaved a path towards the Psychor outpost surrounded by the Soviets, and launched a proper attack on the forces withholding the original chronosphere. A wide array of units were employed by the Soviets, with many scavenged Chinese and Euro equipment mixed into their arsenal. But the Epsilon army spared no expenses either, bringing in their own aircrafts, as well as their new long-range siege weapon, the Magnatron. One of the many successful results of Psychor's venture into the field of magnetism. They're powerful electromagnets capable of emanating beams that can rip structures apart piece by piece. In addition to new toys from the genetic research team, an offensive superweapon in the form of a combat stimulant dispenser, using Epsilon's proprietary terminus drugs to drastically enhance the effectiveness of their frontline troops. The device was successfully captured, dismantled, and delivered back into Yuri's hands. It did not take long for the great leader to figure out the rough inner workings of the old chronosphere. And with it, he has teleported Epsilon's newest technological marvel straight into the city of London. The aerial fortress Irkalla, a mechanical monstrosity packed with unparalleled firepower to lay devastation wherever it so desires. Chronos shifting into the London fortress, the Irkalla, garrisoned by a battalion of Yuri's most loyal and elite troops, decimated the awe-stricken Allied soldiers under the proselytes' command. The defenders retaliated in turn, sending multiple groups of entire units at the aerial fortress, but they disintegrated quickly before its deadly dissolver beams. Green rays of death rained upon the hapless soldiers, with Epsilon's finest following closely behind. Various task forces that snuck their way into the city revealed themselves one after another, further exacerbating the crisis forced upon the Allies. Amidst the carnage he had orchestrated, however, the proselytes sensed something is amiss. Even though they were smack dab in the heart of the Allied nations, their foes seemed reserved, disinterested even, in stopping them. Rather than heading towards the invaders, legions of Allied troops instead turned the other way, congregating around a large hangar on the far side of River Thames. Endless waves of Allied soldiers entered the hangar, as if it had an infinite amount of space inside. Along the way, various sectors of the city were also cordoned off, each protected by a repurposed shield command. But even these seemed less like a defense mechanism against the Irkalla, but more so a way to stall its advance. The more they rampaged across the city, the more the proselytes' suspicion grew. Hesitation is defeat, however, and the only way to dismiss their concerns is to destroy the Steinstech hangar itself. The Epsilon forces turned their attention towards the large structure, even ignoring the heavily fortified British Parliament. It did not take long before all of the hangar's defenders had been eliminated, and its shield projector destroyed. As the force shield dissipated, a smile crept up the proselyte's face. Perhaps they simply worried too much. After all, what other moves could the Allies be possibly hiding inside that hangar? A new superweapon? A marvel of engineering like the Irkalla? A preposterous thought. In the end, none shall stand against the Epsilon.
Are you picking this up? Good.